Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to yet another episode of SecurIT. We're going to be getting this in by the end of the year, so it should get to you sometime in the first quarter of 2023. So wishing you all a happy new year, and hopefully all is well and stable in the cybersecurity world. Our guest today, exciting, so exciting that we're actually going to risk putting this podcast on video for the first time. Very photogenic, very knowledgeable in areas of cybersecurity, and comes across with global experience, if I may say so. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome Paul Baker. How are you, Paul?
I'm good, thanks, Philip. How about yourself?
Excellent. Thank you.
Glad to hear it.
Between this podcast and the end of the year and a nice break, is getting this done successfully. So let's get it done. So Paul, as is typical with all our guests, we bookend our conversations on a personal front. We'd like to know more about you, your career. We normally have guests on this program that are about to enter into cybersecurity or trying to understand the technology behind a product. And we hope to give them a glimpse at both. You may find people reaching out to you for advice on careers. And we look at this podcast as planting those seeds, so to speak, early enough, because God only knows we can't have enough cybersecurity personnel.
Yeah, for
So,
sure.
with that, Paul, BSc in computer science, from across the pond
Yep.
to owning your own business, business development. You've been around the block, and you are now director of sales at Plurilock, a leading edge cybersecurity startup that we both belong to. That destiny put us on the same screen and on the same org chart. So with that, tell us, some of the things and the choices that you made along your career that got you here. Walk us through your career, please.
It's it's been an interesting journey to this point for sure. So I graduated from Brunel University in West London back in the mid '90s. And my first job out of that was actually working for a company that did telecommunication systems, so call management systems and voice recording. Um, and that role meant spending an awful lot of time driving between customer sites, but it also meant that I got to sit with customers in their environments and really see how technology was helping organizations. Loads of different customers, finance, IT, healthcare, you name it, they had these systems in place. And of course, it was the mid to late '90s at that point, so it was the fun start of the whole, really the start of the internet as we know it today, and of course the dot-com boom that came with that. So I moved on to there from there to work for a small startup, a Swiss American company, and at the time, bandwidth was an issue. Right, people suddenly discovered there was always this great content that they wanted to be able to deliver to people, but there was really the fast networks that we have at home now just didn't exist. You were paying thousands of dollars for DSL T1 type of connections and getting next to nothing from them. So they were doing data broadcasting via satellite. So you could multicast big data files at super high speeds, 50 megabits, which at the time was just unheard of speed, down to thousands of people at once. Great fun. It was a true .com startup experience. Crazy, crazy times. Brilliant fun. And like all good .coms at the time, imploded massively at the when that bubble burst. But again, just really interesting stuff, and that really, I think, cemented my love of getting people excited about new technology. No one else was doing it, and being able to go out and talk to people about things that are just new and different and solve problems in really unique ways has been something that has always been with me really throughout my career. So I moved on from them, did some kind of fairly boring, fairly standard IT stuff again, lots of telephony work, lots of on-site work, and really it was at that point, probably I don't know, early 2000s, that really that security question was starting to pop up. The internet was much more widespread. People were now having DSL connections at home. There was these always on connections instead of the dial-up world, and people really suddenly start to think, hey, we've got all these systems here. What's going on? And in particular, of course, that coincided with very much the push from centralized computing to edge devices, right? The Windows desktop and all those sort of classic things that we're all familiar with. So yeah, just a huge increase in awareness around security in general. It was sort of the start of the antivirus world as well. You know, the first few viruses that were coming out, kind of kicking everyone into gear there. And then an opportunity came to jump to another exciting startup. There's a common theme here,
Uh-huh.
um, and they were doing things in the mobile space. So when we think to the kind of mobile devices that were out at that time, Nokia was king. So
Yep.
S40s, S60s, all those kinds of things, and it was the start of the smartphone. You know, obviously now it's so ubiquitous that no one really thinks a bit about it. But at the time, data was phenomenally expensive. You know, $15 for a megabyte of data through the cellular networks, that kind of thing. And so they would do some interesting stuff using Bluetooth to look for devices in an area and actually send them content. So things like interactive signage, right? You could walk up to a movie poster and download wallpapers and video clips and things like that, linked to those movies. Really interesting stuff. And again, that theme of telling people a new way to do something, right? That hey, you've got these limitations, but here's a cool use of technology that can overcome those, that can solve those problems for you. And again, that education piece. Um, that did various things. Didn't really go anywhere. Yeah, it was kind of, it was, if it had been a few years before, it would have had great success. But that was just at the point then where, of course, the more modern, Windows Mobile. And the early incarnations of iPhones and Androids and things started coming along, and just that whole mobile data problem was kind of solved by the networks, right? Data became much cheaper, much more freely available, so there wasn't really this need for those kinds of solutions anymore. So I went and did some consulting on my own, um, primarily SME space, local companies that just needed general help with getting themselves set up. It was kind of there was still a lot of on-prem things there, but it was very very early days for the cloud at that point. So there was a little bit of cloud stuff involved there. Um, Tons of security, of course. That was always a big concern at that point. You know, people now have these 2 megabit connections, which were enormous, and they were sort of trying to lock things down, trying to secure their end users in particular. They recognised even then that the end user was unfortunately a relatively easy point of ingress for people that wanted to do bad things. And then I made the decision to move west. So I hopped on a plane. Well, it was a bit more to it than that. Hopped on a plane and ended up in British Columbia, in Western Canada. That was about 14 years ago, something like that. Took a little while to explore the area. You know, it didn't seem right to just move halfway around the world, immediately jump into work, and
Sure.
then found myself in a health tech company. So worked for a company that did electronic medical records. So again, lots of time visiting and talking to physicians and physician offices primarily. Fascinating bunch of people, very very intelligent, um, willing to embrace technology where it helped them, but very very quick to discard anything that impaired their ability to do their job. And that's really where I started to think about friction in the workplace and how IT systems brought friction, or tried to solve friction depending on the particular use case. So that was kind of interesting. They then got bought, and I moved to a company that did GIS systems, geographical information systems. So allowing you to overlay um, maps effectively with data. So you could look at data in a new way and say, let's consider the geographical aspect of data. Really, really interesting stuff. And it was while I was there, I met with Ian, who I think you've had on an earlier podcast,
I did.
who's CEO here at Plurilock. And we met at a little hipster coffee shop in Victoria, BC, out on Vancouver Island. And in about 20 seconds, he explained what Plurilock did, and it was like, wow, that's so cool. Um, and I had to have it. So
Abs-
five years ago, almost to the day, in fact, I joined Plurilock, and I've been here ever since.
Wow. Congratulations. 5 years.
Yeah, it's
You've
been a
you've
it's
yeah.
been a long time. Seen some change in that, I can tell you.
You've passed the test, Paul. Thank you. What an amazing journey. And as I relive all those stops, Y2K.com. Over here in the United States, we were going out to Home Depot to buy doors and put them on little A-frames because it was cool, and that was your desk during this dot-com startup
Yep.
uh, whole era, right? And it was cool
Yes.
to have.
It was just a super exciting time for
It
technology.
was.
Right,
It was
everyone was so full of energy about these new things that were going on. Brilliant time to be out working.
very exciting, very exciting. And then to transfer from Y2K to .com, you talked about Nokia. For us, it was Motorola and doing their
Yep.
whole thing, the Iridium. And then you talked about DSL and bandwidth. And as you went through that, and I was reliving the highs and lows here, Paul, a thought struck me. You have some knowledge that most of our guests on this show don't really have, which is you've lived an IT life in Europe and then now in North America at both ends of that vast country that is Canada. So
Yep.
you've actually made the journey, and I have to say this because we all tease you about it, that you've actually driven from Vancouver to Nova Scotia in the middle
I,
of a hurricane. There
yep.
should be there
Yep.
should be some kind of award for that. So compare and contrast for a few minutes because this question was really not on the script. Is one behind the other? Are we in tandem? Do you see similar trends in both continents?
That's an interesting question. I think it's almost indiscernible. And I think
Amazing.
that's the great thing about technology. It's a real leveler.
Yeah,
The speed it moves, the accessibility to it. There's differences in terms of things like how fast services are rolled out and so on. But I think at its core, it's very, very similar. And particularly today, right, everything is global, everything is cloud, everything is online, everything is 24/7 connected. Um, they're really, there's nothing between the two now.
you're right. That's insightful, and I wanted to hear it from you because we're hiring globally. It's a work from anywhere space, and the candidate that we hire, from Eastern Europe or Asia, is really on par with anyone in the United States or North America for that matter. So
Yep,
well said. Technology is a leveler. Um,
definitely, and it's driven by that bandwidth availability.
True.
You know,
Mm.
you sit here now on your gigabit fiber connections at home, and that kind of amount of bandwidth was just unthinkable 5 years ago, let alone 15 years ago. Definitely been the great leveler.
Exciting times. Paul, let's talk about your role in Plurilock. Uh, for me, the holding company, for you, the actual company that you work with. We've been on many a demo of Defend together. We've talked to CIOs and CTOs of very large investment companies who've had their entire environment completely locked down. We've talked to pseudo hackers who've been very impressed with the product. And we've talked to retirement fund managers a few times, who've looked at the product and actually one turned into a customer. So in your current role as at Plurilock, specifically in the interaction that you have with potential customers, what are some of the cybersecurity trends that are currently top of mind for you?
Um, there's trends and there's kind of just general observations. I don't think it's any surprise to anyone that things aren't really getting better in terms of attacks. The bad guys aren't going away because people have put new tools in place. They're just finding new and interesting ways to try and defeat them. But it strikes me that there's still such little on the basic security front. You talk to organizations that still don't have good patch management. They will, we've got an antivirus, so we'll be fine, but they don't seem to be any kind of focus on the low hanging fruit. That's improved greatly, I think, in the last 2 years. If there's one thing you can say about the pandemic, that push to get everyone working from home and things like that has really focused, I think, a lot of people's minds on security, which is fantastic. We see MFA now is pretty ubiquitous. It's difficult still to apply to a whole bunch of systems, but it's getting there. But yeah, just things like patch management. You see these, you know, CVEs and things like that that were announced 2 years ago, and there's still people being breached by them where they just haven't updated systems for whatever reason. And I think until those kinds of messages can get through, I think there's going to be a fundamental problem at the very kind of basic level of security. But the good thing is most people, I think, are trying to solve that now. Security is not something that happens just to the other people anymore, and it doesn't matter what size of an organization you are. 5 people or 50,000 people, someone wants to come in there and see what they can do. Right, whether
True.
it's ransomware, whether it's actual hacking, whether it's phishing, whether it's who knows what. People are interested in getting into your data regardless of what your organization is. So everyone now is very much thinking about those kinds of things, and that's definitely a great trend. It's really good to hear some of the more sophisticated organizations actually talking about and doing something about things like zero trust. And zero trust is one of those fantastic concepts that's been around for a long time, in maybe under a different name, but it's really that whole defense in depth. Right, let's consider everything. Let's not just build a nice strong perimeter. Let's look at everything that's going on within that perimeter as well. So yeah, lots of people now are practically trying to implement things to get them to this zero trust goal, and that's amazing to see, because I think that's where things have to end up. And yeah, just solving real world problems now. Right, I think there's enough data out there now about successful attacks and breaches and how people are being attacked and breached that you're able to actually now think about not just what is my system, but how is someone going to try and attack me, right? What routes are they going to take? What do I care about? What do I need to protect? And that gives you that focus then to actually start to do something meaningful about it.
True. Well described. As you're talking, I'm thinking about a few things. One, these paradigm shifts in the way we think about cybersecurity. That proverbial firewall that, you walked into the office, you swiped your card, you heard the door click behind you, you were behind a firewall, we opened and closed ports with great caution. We had this geo fence, so to speak, and we were relatively proverbially and in some sense of perspective safe.
Yep,
Work from anywhere took that whole darn thing and threw it out the window. You and I have talked about this whole insider threat. The insider is no longer inside, right? The insider could be sitting 1,000 miles away from where you are, and
yep,
life is changing fast as we design and um, implement cloud security architecture.
yep,
Um, so let's focus on the CISOs, the CIOs, the CTOs that are listening to this podcast, and tell us what are some of the information technology areas that you would like to focus on. You have a wand, the world is your oyster, and you'd wish that there was like a one, two, three in terms of cybersecurity focus. What would it be?
So I think part of the problem today is that everyone's told this is what you should be doing, but no one's telling you practically how to do it. Right, here's the problem that you have to solve, and then they're just leaving it up to you to try and figure out how to solve it. So I think it would be very helpful if there was more guidance out there around, okay, here's a for example, a control that I have to meet. What can I do to actually meet that control? What technology can I get that's going to help me do that? What processes do I need to put in place to help me meet that? So I think those kinds of things would be very, very useful, because ultimately it's down to the CISOs and so on to say, yes, we meet those requirements, we meet these things, we are, we're suitably risk set up in our organization. So I think that's something where everyone needs to focus, right? Is on the
Sure.
practical implementation of tools or processes or whatever it needs to be to actually meet some of these challenges, because they're difficult. Right, there's a lot of those things, requirements that are really, really difficult to just say, oh yeah, I'll go and get product X, and that lets me do that. That lets me check that box. So I think that's certainly something they should be looking at.
High priority. There are multiple influences, Paul. We're driven a lot by need, right?
Yeah,
It's the end of the year. It's annual physical time. You go thinking you're absolutely healthy. Go get your blood test, and suddenly sugar levels are up, and that's the priority of the day. Stop eating chocolate. And this is a hypothetical
yep,
example, nothing to do with me personally. Similarly, there's GRC, right? There's governance, regulation, and compliance. And I'm translating because someone once said if I use a three-letter acronym without explaining it, I should put a dollar in the jar. So, we've got through GRC, we've got NIST telling us about zero trust. We've got the SEC saying, hey, go do this. And that puts a lot of pressure on CISOs and CIOs. And what the heck do they do first? Right in the middle of meeting board requirements, there's an audit requirement or a cybersecurity insurance requirement. And so it's juggling multiple balls in the air. And, as humans, I feel we naturally gravitate towards the squeakiest wheel or the biggest rock or whatever hip management jargon you want to use for that pain point.
yep.
Uh, any advice, and you see this in your day-to-day life at Plurilock, any advice on how to cue these things?
Yeah, I mean it's always a carrot and a stick. It seems to be at
Whoa,
the
well
moment.
said. Yes.
Yeah, it seems to be at
Uh-huh.
the moment that the carrots are very small and the sticks are
Yeah,
quite big.
right.
So I would focus on which stick is going to hurt the most
Yep,
if you get hit by it, right? And that's where you can start your process. The good thing is that a lot of these different standards are all actually at their core based on the same things, right? There's
sure.
common requirements. There's a whole bunch of things that are very common across all of them. Whether you're looking at CMMC or ISO certifications or even NIST and some of these, they're all really got the same stuff at their core. So if you can focus on those core requirements of one of them, and as I say, pick the one that's got the biggest stick, and if you can fulfill most of those, you're probably going to be okay for any of the other controls that you need to implement. So that's where I would start.
Deep thoughts. You probably don't even know how deep that conversation that you just described is, Paul. So here's the deal, right? I'm going to put my business strategy hat on and life coach and mentor hat on. Normally, you wake up one morning and you either want to be in the MBA or do something great or change the world, and we normally measure for our goals by upside and downside. And I always tell people that I'm talking to, when you're taking a decision, look at what the potential upside is versus what the potential downside is. So if you're going to go get your MBA and it's going to cost you 30,000, that's probably the downside. But the upside is the fact that it's going to change your career, your earning, you know possibilities, and so you measure for that when you take decisions. Interestingly, Mr. Baker, you've reversed that in a cybersecurity perspective. So, for all the Pinnacle and EOS and startup implementers who do this for a living, you're saying for the cybersecurity structure, look at the biggest downside first, right? What do you stand to lose, and solve for that. So that's a nice way to look at it.
Yeah, absolutely right. Find what's your crown jewels,
Right.
right? Start there, figure out how to protect them, and work up from there. I think companies, some are starting to, and others I think are behind. I think they need to realize that it seems at least that a breach is almost inevitable. So you need to be thinking about A, how do I minimize the chances of that? Because it's never going to get to zero. But also B, what do I do when it happens? Right? How do I ensure that I am minimizing collateral damage? So if they get to resource A, how can I make sure they can't use that to leverage getting to resource B and onwards through my systems? Um, so yeah, and
Like it.
start off with the stuff that's most valuable to you. That's the stuff you care about.
Thank you. Um, Dream with me for a minute, okay? We've got Microsoft chomping at the bit to get rid of passwords. So is Google and Facebook and all these other major influencers. Um, You mentioned MFA as being ubiquitous, and I urge you to think about the fact that MFA is painful. There's multiple tools and apps sitting on a phone, and sometimes I've got to wonder if it's Tuesday, should I be using the Google Authenticator for Wells Fargo? And, if it's Wednesday morning and I'm getting into a different system, am I using Okta? It's like, there's all these different things, and there's MFA fatigue. In addition to that,
Yep.
um, there's much information out there that 90% of MFA is hackable, mainly because of the fact that it's sitting on your phone and subject to man-in-the-middle attacks, right?
Yep.
So we're evolving, we're moving forward in this conversation as to the future of cybersecurity. We've done it in other areas of technology. It's about time that cybersecurity and processes and machine learning uh, has some paradigm shifts as we speak.
Yep.
So, where do you see us? Like, what is the future of cybersecurity, Paul?
So, I mean, the fundamental question that you care about in security is this actually the user there doing something, right? Or is this someone else who has managed to impersonate that user? And I think the problem that most identity-based security has today is that it still relies on trust, right? It relies that it says, okay, well, you're on a known machine or a known network or a known location, so you must be okay, right? So there's that element of trust, and there's an awful lot of inference, which is kind of related, but it's basically saying you are you, the human being, because of things that are nothing to do with the human being. So that you have a phone, or you have a fob, or you have a certificate, or you have a TPM module in your trusted module in your computer, and those are nothing to do with you as a human being. That's a thing, and the large weakness of a thing is that things can be lost or stolen. So I think the shift needs to be is how do you link the human being back to that identity in such a way that it's secure, as secure as you can make it. That it's some attribute of you as a person, not you as a thing related to a person. So I think that's where we're going to start seeing these shifts, and that's what we're doing at Plurilock. Is exactly trying to solve that problem. Yeah, I think it's going to be one of the big things. The other big things that are coming, I think, in security are interoperability. Right, everyone's saying, "Buy my tool, it does this. Buy my tool, it does that. Buy my tool, it does this." And great, but you can't be looking at and managing 1,000 different tools to try and secure your environment. Right, you need these tools to work together. There needs to be much more automation. You can't have someone staring at 1,000 different alerts coming in an hour because they're going to miss things. So you need a lot more automation, a lot more intelligence around actually trying to figure out, is something going on, right? Is this a problem I'm looking at, or is this just normal day-to-day things that happen in my systems? And I think it's all going to come back to really is acceptable risk. I think as I said, I think once you accept the fact that there's going to be some kind of breach happen, what's an acceptable risk for you um, if that happens, and what happens after that, and how do you deal with that? And that may be linked to cyber insurance. I mean, that's a whole that's a whole other discussion
Sure,
we can have as well,
absolutely.
the
Yep.
insurance side of things. But yeah, just what does it mean for my organization if that happens, and what do I need to spend to make that not happen? Because it's always, as you say, a risk reward balance, right? You could spend hundreds of millions of dollars putting every security tool in place that you possibly want to protect something that's worth $5, right? There's no point in doing that. So yeah, just kind of figuring out what's my risk here. Um, and finding tools that can help you determine that. Right, people have no idea really what's going on in their environment these days. They're all so distributed. There's data everywhere. There's users everywhere. There's services and processes everywhere. How do you know what's really going on? So yeah, that's where I think this interoperability, automation, those kinds of things can really help.
Very insightful as I look into the future, and I'm going to take basically three data points from your conversation. So one, obviously, is part of Plurilock's DNA, and I'm going to loosely put that under artificial intelligence, right? There's a machine learning component. There's all these areas that we could argue endlessly on, but
Yep.
to generalize, there's artificial intelligence. This is automation of processes. This is knowing who you are, where you are, right data, right place, access, identity access, and every single acronym that you want to throw at it. You have repeatedly talked about big data, Paul, right? Through this podcast. And you're right, there's a fire hose of information that, pre-DSL we didn't have, right? We now have. And last but not least, the human intelligence piece, right? So I talk about businesses and executing on policies and educating uh, our personnel, right? There's the top 10% of um, EOS implementers having brilliant conversations about how to make the organization more efficient, how to get and train the human element. So the confluence, or the point at which human intelligence, artificial intelligence, and big data meet, I feel is what you're saying is where the magic happens.
I think so. It has to, right? Those are where the three. That's where the problems start,
So,
right? You've
yeah,
got these hugely valuable lumps of data. You've got huge amounts of metadata surrounding that, of signal streams, of security tools, of who knows what else, and then you've got the bag of meat sat there operating everything.
right.
And poor end users, they get a lot of grief. Oh, that's where all the
Sure.
problems start.
Yeah,
Security for them is a big job,
good job.
right? They're not security people. Phishing attempts and things like that are getting so incredibly realistic now. It used to be you could spot them a mile off. They were barely spoke English, or obviously from bad email addresses. They're way past that. Right, they're incredibly sophisticated, and you can't expect an end user to be 100% all the time, which is effectively what we say they need to be.
True.
So yeah, how do you take some of that strain off the end user? Because ultimately that's going to help you.
I see that the end user strain, and I'll raise you one more because we're blending management with cybersecurity, and as good managers, we're building strong teams, and we often tell them, again, this is straight out of US playbooks. Hey, trust builds teams. That's the basic tenet. Be at home and you trust your family, we're your work family. If we don't have trust, we can't go through the 5 levels of the pyramid, and yet with your cybersecurity hat on, we preach zero trust, and it's confusing, right? It's
Yep.
hard to partition, and there are very few people who have compartmentalization as a superpower, so to speak. And for the average person, it could get very complex and very confusing. So
Yep.
before we start charging, $250 an hour for this very insightful couch session, so to speak, on employee behavior at work, Paul, let me move on to some fun stuff. In closing, let's talk about you. Um, from earning your degree to volunteering. What are some of the influences in your career? Let's talk about family, your mantra, so to speak, and your core values. What drives the man behind the director of sales at Plurilock?
So I think curiosity is a huge driver of mine. It drives my wife absolutely insane.
Mhm.
Whenever we go anywhere, I've always got to see what's around the next corner. If there's a sign that says "Do not enter this area, risk of avalanche or wolf attack or whatever," I want to go and see. So that drives her absolutely crazy. So that's been a very very common factor throughout my life, and I think that's been reflected in some of the things that I enjoy doing. So I'm an avid sailor. I've been sailing out here in Canada for 12 years, lots of
Wow.
racing and sailing my own boats and things like that. And so it's kind of a strange one because it's incredibly relaxing. It You're just absolutely focused. You've got the wind, the water, and that's really it. Um, but yet you have to focus an awful lot when you're doing it. But
Yeah,
it's
the
a really
reciprocal drive. Yep.
good focus. It's almost zen like. So that's kind of nice to get your mind off things. And just that you never stop learning. And I think that's always key to any career is if you're not learning something new every day, then you're doing something wrong, because it's a big world. There's a lot to learn, and even in something that you've been doing your whole life, there's still new things you can learn about that. So just kind of that desire to keep seeing what's around the corner is definitely something that's driven me. Yeah, but to do that, of course, you need stable things in your life as well that
Sure.
that lets you do that. So I've been with my now wife for, I should probably know exactly how long, but yeah, 30 something years.
We will
Um,
edit this part of the conversation out,
yeah,
Paul.
that's good.
The something
Just
part, yes.
just remind me when my anniversaries are.
Yeah.
But
Uh,
yeah. So she's always been a rock there. Kids and pets and fun stuff like that. Yeah.
cool. So, congratulations again on your 5-year to the day work anniversary and your
It's
30 something life anniversary, Paul.
yeah,
Well done. Thank you for all the wisdom, and definitely you got me thinking about a few things that I have shared in response to your comments.
awesome.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on this episode of SecurIT as I continue the cybersecurity discussion with customers, vendors, end users, influencers, and employees, helping us to learn from their insights, knowledge, and experience. Today was awesome. We hit all those high points. Thank you, Paul Baker.
You're welcome.
Make sure to follow us and this podcast for free on Google, Spotify, and wherever podcasts are hosted. Please do DM me on LinkedIn, Twitter with your comments, feedback, kudos, questions. And Paul, I'm going to offer on your behalf that if should people want to reach out to you and we put a link to your LinkedIn profile, that should be fine.
Absolutely, always happy to talk to people.
Beautiful. Thanks again.